A reserved young woman made a bold, life-altering decision to undergo breast augmentation surgery. But what drove someone so quiet to such a drastic change? Beneath her soft voice lies a storm of heartbreak, humiliation, and a desperate need to reclaim control. What she didn't expect was that the surgeon behind the mask would be a young millionaire who already knew her secrets. This isn't just a makeover, it's the start of something far deeper. Her doctor is a young millionaire, and the rain gently taps on the window of a small coffee shop in downtown Seattle. But inside, the tension is anything but gentle. Be honest. Claire. Tyler's voice cut through the whisper of the coffee machine and the distant jazz music. Do you really think I stayed with you because you're cute? Claire Weston, 26 years old, sat across from him, her hands clutching a warm cup of tea she hadn't touched much. Her blonde hair framed a face that seemed to have forgotten how to smile. You're so cute, he went on, waving his hand like he was describing a pet. You're obedient. You're safe. But Claire, you're just boring. You're like cardboard. And your chest is flat. He chuckled coldly, tapping the table with his fingers, flatter than the surface itself. Those words echoed in her ears long after he said them. She stared at him, her face pale, lips parted like she wanted to protest, but no words came out. Her throat tightened, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the cup. Are you serious? Her voice was barely a whisper, strained and breaking with disbelief. Tyler stood up slowly. I'm done pretending, he said, then put on his coat like he'd just closed a business deal. I need someone who makes me feel alive, someone who turns heads when she walks in. You're not that girl. Claire, you never were. He tossed some bills on the table, enough for his espresso, but not enough to cover the damage he left behind. Without another glance, he headed for the door, pushed it open, and right outside the glass, a woman in tight jeans and red lipstick stepped into his arms like they'd rehearsed it. The coffee shop door rattled shut behind them. Claire didn't move. Around her, life went on. Spoons clinked. Coffee steamed. Someone laughed too loudly. But she was in a completely different place. Her tea had gone cold, just like the part of her heart that once held Tyler's name. A young waitress walked by their table and glanced at Claire like she wanted to say, I see it, but I'm not asking. Then she disappeared into the cafe's noise. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a downpour. That night, Claire stood under the fluorescent lights in her cramped bathroom. The small, scratched mirror was surrounded by cracked tiles. She stared at her reflection like it was the first time she'd seen it, and not in a good way. Her blonde hair fell around her face. Her blue eyes looked dull, like the color had drained out of them. She reached up and slowly unbuttoned her shirt, each movement mechanical and distant. Her collarbone was sharp, her chest flat under her faded bra. Her fingers trembled as they brushed her skin, feeling foreign and unforgiving. She couldn't stop hearing his voice. Cardboard, flat, not enough. She whispered to the girl in the mirror, Am I really that invisible? There was no answer. She slid down the wall, hugging her knees tight. The cold floor seeped into her skin, but the numbness inside her was worse. Her phone buzzed from the sink counter. A notification. Instagram. Tyler had posted a story. Her heart sank as she opened it. He was at a bar. The woman with red lipstick was next to him, laughing brightly, her curves on full display, head resting on his shoulder. The caption read, Finally with someone who gets me. Claire's stomach dropped. She pressed her forehead to her knees, trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway. Hot, bitter, unstoppable. She shakily picked up her phone again and opened Google. She didn't think. She just typed, Discreet breast augmentation in Seattle. A clinic popped up, 5-star, private, with glowing testimonials. She stared at the screen, her chest pounding, her heart breaking in silence. She bookmarked it. Still on the floor, Claire pressed a hand to her chest like she was trying to feel something, anything under her skin. A heartbeat, a reason to believe she was still okay. But all she felt was emptiness. Under the flickering bathroom light, Claire whispered into the silence, If I change, maybe I'll finally be worth sticking around for. And the mirror didn't argue. It just reflected her pain, silent and harsh. The private clinic's waiting room was unlike anywhere Claire had been before. No sterile white walls, no overpowering chemical smell. Instead, warm, earthy tones, soft jazz playing in the background, and a faint lavender scent in the air. It felt more like a high-end spa than a surgery center. Still, her heart was racing. She had checked in at the front desk under the name Anna Lee. The receptionist didn't bat an eye. Discretion was their promise. After all, Claire sat in the waiting area, her palms sweaty on her jeans. She wore a simple sweater, her blonde hair tied in a low ponytail. She had minimal makeup on, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. In her purse, she clutched a folded piece of paper with questions she'd written down in case she forgot how to speak. A door opened. A nurse called her name, the borrowed one, and led her down a quiet hallway. Claire followed, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. When they reached the exam room, the nurse gestured for her to wait. A moment later, the door opened again, and Julian Reeves walked in. He was tall, around 30, wearing dark pants and a soft gray sweater under his white coat, no tie. His sleeves were rolled up slightly, revealing strong, capable arms. But it was his eyes that made her catch her breath. Calm, steady, not intrusive, just present. He gave a light smile, almost knowing, like he could sense the storm behind her silence. "Anna, right," he said gently, extending his hand. She nodded, hesitating, then took it. His handshake was warm and firm. He sat across from her and opened her file. He spoke carefully, but not coldly. "What brings you here today?" Claire stared at her hands. The room suddenly felt too quiet, her throat tightening. The words stuck behind her lips like stones. Julian waited. Then he closed the file. "Let me guess," he said, his voice even gentler. "You're not here because you hate your body. You're here because someone else convinced you it's not enough." She looked up. For a second, she looked like a deer in headlights. Julian leaned back. "This happens more than you think. Someone we trust says something that cuts deeper than a scalpel. And we come here thinking maybe we can stitch that wound with a procedure." Claire's eyes welled up, but she blinked fast, keeping the tears at bay. He didn't push, just looked at her with that quiet patience. He tapped her file. "I'll help you," he said clearly, "but only if you're doing this for yourself, not to win back someone who doesn't deserve you." "Okay." The air rushed out of Claire's lungs. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping back. I should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This was a mistake. She turned toward the door. Julian stood too, but he didn't block her way. Instead, he gently reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, not to stop her, but to let her know he was there. "You can stay," he said softly, "not as a patient, just as someone who deserves kindness, respect, and dignity." Claire froze. No one had ever said that to her before, not in a way that made her feel it. She didn't say anything, just slowly sat down, her hand still shaking. Julian handed her a glass of water. She took it. They didn't talk much after that. He asked a few medical questions, and the rest was straightforward. His gaze never wandered, never judged. When the consultation ended, he gave her his personal business card with his number, not the clinic's, a notepad underneath for any questions, big or small. As Claire stepped out into the Seattle drizzle, she looked up at the sky for the first time in days. It was still gray, but something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, stirred with hope. The white sheets felt too clean, too quiet. Claire lay there, the hum of machines around her, the drip of the IV by her bed. The surgery was over, successful, according to the nurse's brief words. Minimal complications, smooth recovery. But the room was silent. No phone calls, no flowers, no friends or family waiting. Just the slow tick of the clock and the ache in her chest, not from the incision, but from the emptiness. Claire turned her head slightly and stared out the window. Seattle's sky was its usual gloomy gray. Raindrops hit the glass like a steady beat, syncing with her thoughts. Rhythmic, relentless, cold. An old leather notebook tucked under sometime that afternoon. Her eyelids grew heavy. She dozed off, hugging an old leather notebook tucked under the covers with her. It was the only thing she brought besides her clothes, her lifeline. A few hours later, the door opened quietly. Julian walked in, clipboard in hand. His steps were light but careful. He didn't expect her to be awake. Seeing her leaned to one side, asleep, with one hand loosely gripping the sheet. His expression softened. He quietly checked the monitors and made a few notes. Then, as he turned to leave, he noticed the notebook slipping from her hand. He gently reached over and placed it on the nightstand, but as it tilted open, there was something inside that caught his eye. A sketch. Just a pencil. A sketch. Just a pencil drawing. The lines were light but haunting. A girl sitting alone in the corner of the page, hunched and small, knees pulled to her chest. But behind her, faint and uncertain, were wings, unfinished, not yet spread, just beginning to grow. Grow. Julian froze. He stared at the image for a long moment, his breath catching. It wasn't the skill of the drawing that impressed him. It was the soul in it, the silent cry wanting to break free, the pain of someone held back for so long she'd forgotten she could fly. He carefully closed the book and set it where it wouldn't fall again. Then he stood there, looking down at Claire, her eyebrows slightly furrowed, even in sleep, her breathing slow and shallow. "She's trying," he whispered. "She's trying to fly." That night, long after his shift ended, Julian didn't go home. Instead, he stayed in his private office upstairs. An unopened set of watercolors sat on the shelf, a gift from a patient who said she hoped he'd use them someday. Tonight, he did. On thick paper, he drew with the same steady hand he used in surgery. He let the colors breathe life into the sketch he'd seen. That girl now had wings blooming in vibrant blues and purples, standing with her back to the light, no longer trapped in the corner, but stepping forward. By dawn, it was done. The painting sat quietly in a thin wooden frame. Below it, in neat handwriting, he wrote a single line: "You have wings, even if you don't see them yet." At 6 a.m., Julian returned to Claire's room. She was still asleep. Her face was turned toward the window where the morning fog gently eased the pain. Pain. He placed the painting on the table beside her bed. When Claire woke up an hour later, the first thing she saw wasn't the white ceiling or the IV line. It was the painting. She blinked, slowly sitting up. Her hands reached out before her thoughts could catch up. She stared at it. Her lips parted. The girl. The wings. The message. A tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. She looked around the room, but Julian was gone. For the first time since she walked into the clinic. Claire smiled, not because someone gave her something, not because she looked different, but because someone had truly seen her. Not her appearance, not the surface, her, the quiet, hurting, broken part trying to become whole. She hugged the painting to her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something. It was a beginning. Claire wasn't the girl crying in the bathroom mirror anymore. She wasn't completely changed, no, but something had shifted. A quiet awakening had started inside her, like spring sunlight melting the last of the frost. It started with small things. She signed up for a yoga class. She started sketching again. She walked through the park without headphones, letting herself listen to the world for once. And she gradually stopped avoiding the mirror. Instead of staring at her reflection, she looked longer. She touched her collarbone and adjusted her posture. Some mornings, she even smiled. That was the Claire that Julian saw on the day he invited her into his photography studio. The inner light, he said gently as he sipped his coffee. "I'm working on a project called The Inner Light," he said gently as he sipped his coffee. "Portraits of people learning to see themselves differently. I want you to be a part of it." Claire hesitated. Her old instincts screamed to pull back, but her new self, still fragile yet braver, nodded. The studio was minimalist, with warm wooden floors and soft white walls. Soft music played in the background, but as Claire stepped in, her hands trembled slightly. Each spotlight felt like a ghost of every judgmental gaze she'd ever endured. Every step forward was a confrontation with the voice in her head that whispered, "You're never enough." Julian stood a few feet away, adjusting the lights. He didn't rush her or guide her. He just said, "Just breathe and be yourself." Claire exhaled slowly, her eyes looking down. The camera clicked once. She jumped a little. At first, Julian didn't speak directly to her. Instead, he spoke to the light, to the space, to the invisible stories lingering in the silence and stillness. "I remember the first day she walked into my office," he said gently, more with presence than with anyone. Eyes downcast, voice almost a whisper, but in her hands was this sketchbook, and in it, I saw someone who still believed in beauty, even when the world told her she wasn't a part of it. Claire blinked. He continued, "I used to think medicine was the only way to heal, but now I know healing has many languages. Sometimes it's pencil on paper, sometimes it's showing your own life, even when it's painful." Her eyes met his. Slowly, a tear rolled down her cheek, not from pain, but from realization. The next photos captured something different. Her shoulders relaxed, her lips slightly parted. No forced smile, but there was presence. Authenticity. She wasn't hiding anymore. Later, Julian handed her the first printed photo. Claire held it with both hands, her breath catching. "This is me," she whispered, tears welling up again. "Yes," Julian said, his voice warm and steady. "The way I've always seen you. Strong, whole, beautiful in a way too many people are too afraid to name." Claire looked at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she took a step forward, and another, close enough for her fingertips to brush his. Julian didn't move. He didn't need to. In that moment, he wasn't her doctor. He wasn't even her photographer. The hiding was over. The world spun, then faded. He was simply a man who had seen her layer by layer, not as something to fix, but as someone becoming. And she was done hiding. The world spun, then faded. Claire didn't remember the fall, only that the supermarket lights seemed too bright, her legs too heavy, and her breath too shallow. She had reached for a cheap cereal box on the top shelf, ignoring the pounding in her head and the shake in her hands. Then everything went dark. When she woke up, she wasn't under the fluorescent lights or surrounded by cardboard aisles anymore. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in the thick blue wool blanket her mom had sent her years ago. The air smelled of chicken soup, hearty and comforting, with a hint of lemon, like someone had opened a bottle of essential oil nearby. The room was quiet, bathed in the golden light of a single lamp. Rain gently tapped against the window. She felt like she'd stepped out of life's chaos and into a still photo. Then she saw him. Julian was asleep in the armchair across from her, his body awkwardly slumped to one side, a paperback book loosely held in his hand. His chest rose and fell gently. His other hand rested on the armrest. Open, relaxed, vulnerable. Claire blinked slowly, sitting up. The blanket slipped from her shoulder, revealing the familiar old t-shirt she'd worn that morning, now damp with sweat. She glanced at the book on Julian's lap, The Courage to Love Yourself. Her breath caught, taut, into her eyes. "You're awake." Julian stirred as if he felt the change in the room. His eyes opened slowly, at first unfocused, then clear and sharp as they locked onto hers. "You're awake," he said gently, the tension in his shoulders easing. Thank God. Claire tried to sit up straighter, but her body ached. "What happened? You fainted," Julian replied, shifting to sit on the edge of the couch. "I happened to be there. The manager was calling an ambulance, but I panicked. Instead, I brought you here. I hope that's okay." Claire nodded slowly. "More than okay." He leaned in, gently brushing the back of his hand against her forehead. "No fever now. You must have pushed yourself too hard." She closed her eyes for a moment at his touch. His skin was warm, steady. There was a silence between them, not awkward, but full, packed with words they hadn't said, feelings that had built up over weeks. Claire opened her eyes again, studying his face in the soft light, the worry etched in his brow, the gentleness in his mouth, the careful quiet he always carried like a shield. "Why?" she whispered. Julian tilted his head. "Why? Why are you like this? Why are you so good to me?" He looked down at the book in his hand, his thumb tracing the title. "Because true beauty doesn't demand attention," he finally said. "It just needs someone to witness it quietly, to the side, not to hide the tears that completely." Claire bit her lip, her throat burning. She turned her face to the side, not to hide the tears threatening to fall, but to hold them, to feel them fully without breaking. Then there was a knock at the door. Both of them froze. Julian stood up. "Want me to get it?" Claire nodded, suddenly chilled. He crossed the room and opened the door. There, soaked from the rain, stood Tyler. He looked different, less polished, more desperate. His smile froze when he saw Julian, but then his eyes flicked to Claire, lingering, calculating. "You look okay," he said, confidently, even charmingly. "I thought maybe we rushed things. Maybe we could try again." Claire stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She stepped forward slowly and steadily. Rain glistened in her hair. Her voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "I'm not the girl you left behind, Tyler, and I'll never be the woman waiting for you to come back." Tyler's expression shifted, confused, angry, but he said nothing. Julian watched from behind her, silent but firm, and walked away. Claire closed the door, and then Tyler turned and walked away. Claire closed the door. The lock clicked softly. She turned back to Julian. "You don't have to save me," she said. Julian met her eyes. "I don't have to," he replied. "I saved myself. You just reminded me it's possible." In that silence, something new blossomed. No. Quiet. Unhurried. Just right. Enough. Enough. Trust. Claire's world went dark. Trust. Claire's world went dark without warning. She was reaching for an almond milk box in the dim aisle of the 24-hour supermarket, trying to focus through the exhaustion clouding her mind. Her vision blurred. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, seeming to stretch and flicker. She barely registered the sound of her knees hitting the floor before everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the store anymore. She was home. Her apartment was dark and quiet. She lay on the couch, wrapped in the knit blanket she kept for cold nights. The air carried a faint scent of lemon and something warm, maybe chicken soup. The bedside lamp cast a golden glow across the room, and there, sitting a few feet away in the armchair, slumped to one side with a book on his lap, was Julian. For a moment, Claire thought she was dreaming, but then her throat burned with thirst and her arms trembled slightly as she sat up. Julian stirred. His eyes blinked open, still hazy with sleep, until he saw her and immediately leaned forward, his face full of worry. "You're awake," he said gently. His voice was soft, but relief soaked every word. Claire nodded slowly. "What happened? You fainted." "I was just grabbing something for dinner. I saw you collapse and rushed over. You were burning up." He paused, sitting forward to feel her forehead with the back of his hand, still warm, but better than before. She watched him frown as he checked her pulse, glancing at the steaming bowl of soup on the coffee table. He'd stayed. He'd taken care of her. Her voice choked. "You didn't have to do all this." He looked at her, then at the book on his lap. "The Courage to Love Yourself," and gave a half smile. "Maybe I didn't," he said, "but I wanted to." Claire's throat tightened. "Why?" Julian hesitated, then set the book down. "Because you're important, not just as a patient, not just for what you've been through, but for who you are. Someone who's forgotten how deserving she is, and someone needs to remind you." Claire blinked, tears forming. Just then, a firm knock echoed through the quiet apartment. She tensed. Julian stood and headed to the door. Glancing back at her, opened the door and froze. Tyler stood. She nodded weakly. He opened the door and froze. Tyler stood there. Hey, his hair was wet from the rain, and the smile on his lips faded when he saw Julian. Still, he stepped forward, hands in his designer jacket pockets. "I've seen the videos," he said. "The blog. Everything. You've changed. Claire, you look amazing. Confident. Alluring." Claire slowly stood up, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. Tyler smiled. "Maybe we could try again. Maybe this time it could work." Claire looked him straight in the eye, calm and cool. "I'm not the girl you walked away from," she said, "and I'll never be the woman waiting for you to come back." Tyler blinked. Julian stood behind her, silent and still. Tyler opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. He turned and walked away, rain falling behind him. Claire shut the door with a click. Her hand rested on the wood for a moment, breathing slowly. When she turned back, Julian was still there. "I should have said that a long time ago," she whispered. Julian stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I said it when it was needed." She looked at him. Really looked. The man who had seen her without armor. The one who never tried to fix her. Just stood there and believed. "You didn't just bring me home tonight," she said softly. "You reminded me that I have one." Julian reached out, taking her hand. "You built that home." "Claire, I just made sure the lights stayed on." And as her fingers intertwined with his, Claire knew this wasn't a rescue. This was love, patient and real. In the quiet after the storm, Claire's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked. A silent heartbeat on the blank screen. Outside, rain tapped rhythmically against the foggy window, and inside her apartment, every corner held its breath. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint tick of the wall clock, the distant sound of tires on wet pavement. Everything was still. Everything but her. Her heart trembled beneath her ribs, not from fear, but from anticipation. That quiet shiver that comes when you're about to name something you've been afraid to look at. She took a deep breath and started typing. From scars to courage. That's what she had whispered to herself in the darkest hours. Those between midnight and dawn, when the world was silent and self-doubt screamed the loudest, when she lay awake wondering if the pain would ever outweigh the hurt, if her story could ever be more than survival. Then it wasn't just a title, it was a vow. Her blog was now her space, unfiltered, raw, authentic, soft in some spots, rough in others, just like her heart learning to beat again. In her first post, Claire didn't write about breast implants or body image, about betrayal or beauty. Instead, she wrote about shame, that kind of shame that muffles your voice until it forgets how to speak. It was the kind that makes you shrink in your own clothes, apologizing for your existence, hiding in shadows. She wrote about silence, how it can grow bigger than anything when it fills the gap between who you are and who the world tells you to be. She wrote about the guy who made her feel too small, too ordinary, too alive. And she wrote about the man who saw her without asking her to change. She wrote about looking in the mirror for the first time not to check flaws, but to ask, "How are you feeling today?" And then listening, really listening. She ended her post with a single sentence that she had spent 3 weeks and countless tears writing, "I'm not the before or after photo. I am a human being, and I am learning to love her." She stared at that sentence for a long while before clicking the publish button. Then came the responses. At first, a few comments, then dozens, then hundreds. In just one day, there were thousands of comments. Some properly written, others messages flooded her inbox. Some properly written, others messy and chaotic, full of exclamation points and emojis. But they all had the same heartfelt vibe. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't say. You've made me feel seen." A message from a 17-year-old girl in "I cried when I read this. I thought I was alone." And then there was a message from a 17-year-old girl in Kansas. Claire read it at least 10 times, her eyes blurring and her hands shaking. "I used to think I had to be beautiful to be brave, but you've shown me that I just need to be brave to be myself." Claire printed that letter, carefully cutting it with her shaking hands and sticking it on her mirror. Every morning she reads it before brushing her teeth. It reminds her why she started, why she won't stop. With each new post, some full of hope, some doubtful, some unfinished but honest, Julian quietly shares the link. No fanfare, no long captions. But always, always, a message soon arrives in her inbox. "You are the embodiment of healing." Those 6 words never fail to make her pause. One afternoon, Claire sat by the window, her laptop warming her knees, a cup of tea in her hand. She stared at a photo she had taken a few days before, her reflection in a puddle, rain falling like tiny comets on the surface, the image imperfect, blurry, fragmented. She titled it "Becoming." She posted it without a caption. That night, a woman wrote to her, "That photo. That's how I feel every morning. Like I'm still coming into focus, but I'm standing strong." Claire replied, "Just standing strong is enough. You're still here. That's powerful." And that's when she realized, this blog, This space isn't just for her anymore. She had become a mirror, a voice, a gentle beacon for women still searching for their shore, growing like roots in quiet soil. Like she no longer writes from pain, she writes from strength. Not the shouting kind, growing like roots in quiet soil, like wings in a silent room. And when a reader wrote, "You help me see myself," Claire would smile, place her hand on her heart, and whisper to herself, "You help me see myself too." The small gallery, tucked between an old bookstore and a flower shop in downtown Seattle, from the outside, it looked ordinary. Brick walls, a simple glass door, soft yellow lights glowing behind white curtains. But inside, it held a silence that made people listen with their hearts, not just their eyes. Claire hesitated at the threshold. It had been a year since she last saw Julian. Their lives had intersected, unraveled, and woven back together in ways neither expected. And now he had invited her here. No details, just a message. "There's something I want to show you." She stepped inside. The air was warm and scented with lavender. Dim lights focused on one wall at the back of the gallery, where a single frame hung. It was a watercolor painting. Claire froze. She recognized the image right away. The little girl sitting in the dark corner. And behind her, the faintest outline of wings unfolding, becoming the sketch she had once scribbled in her journal when she felt invisible, when she was just trying to survive. But here, it wasn't in pencil. It had color, soft purples, blues of hope, golden light shining through cracks she had never drawn before. Julian had painted this. She trembled as she stepped closer, her eyes glistening. Below the frame, etched on a wooden plaque, were the words, "You are my most beautiful recovery." A voice came from behind her, gentle and familiar. Claire. She turned around. Julian stood there. No white coat, no clipboard, just a man in a simple button-up shirt, his eyes filled with something deeper than admiration. Respect. Love. He took a slow breath. "I've been part of many healings, seen countless scars fade, seen strength return to bodies I feared would never move again, but none of them," he paused, his voice trembling slightly, "none of them changed me the way you have." Claire stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Julian continued, his voice now steady. "I don't want to be your doctor anymore, Claire. I want to be the one walking beside you, not in silence, not at a distance, but hand in hand through whatever comes next." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Claire held her breath, caught in the moment. Inside was a ring, not gold, not diamonds, but simple silver. Engraved inside, "Breathe, shine, choose." Julian knelt down, not for tradition, but for truth. "Will you choose me, Claire Weston, just as I have chosen you?" On her cheek, not from surprise. Not tears flowed freely down her cheek, not from surprise, not from fear, but from knowing. She took his hand and knelt down with him, eyes meeting eyes. For the first time in her life, she whispered, "I choose myself and I choose you." He smiled, bright and full of quiet joy, as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They didn't kiss right away. Instead, they pressed their foreheads together, soaking in the silence that once felt isolating, but now felt like home. Then, they sat on the gallery floor, backs against the wall, fingers intertwined. Claire rested her head on Julian's shoulder. "You've turned my pain into art," she said softly. "You've turned it into light." He replied, outside. The sky darkened into dusk. Inside, the painting glowed like a lantern, proof that even the smallest wings, once noticed, can change everything. Sometimes the deepest scars aren't on the skin, but in the silence, in the shame, in the stories we're too afraid to tell. Claire Weston was once a girl hiding her body, her voice, her truth. But through the pain, through the quiet, and through a man who truly saw her, she discovered something far greater than beauty. She found her worth. She found healing. She found love. And maybe you will too. Through Claire's painful yet courageous journey, we're reminded of how damaging words can be and how deeply they can shape a person's sense of self. But we also learned something powerful, that healing begins when we choose to stop defining ourselves by someone else's cruelty. Claire didn't need to be fixed. She needed to be seen, respected, and valued, not for how she looked, but for who she was beneath the scars and silence. If this story moved you, consider standing with Claire not just as a character, but as a symbol of anyone who's ever been made to feel small or unworthy. Leave her a message of encouragement in the comments. What would you tell someone like Claire who's learning to rebuild from heartbreak? And Claire, if you're listening, take this as your moment. Not to prove anyone wrong, but to rediscover what's been right inside you all along: strength, worth, and the courage to begin again. If stories like Claire's touch your heart and remind you of the quiet power of resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Touching Tales Hub. We share more than stories. We share hope, healing, and the human spirit. See you in the next one.